It's the weekly on the Blue Room, and I'm delighted to be joined by two of my favourite people. And I'm not just saying it because they're on here, but I would say to most people, really, had I not known that they were on tonight. It's Adam Jones and it is Michael Greenall. How are we, boys?
I thought you were saying then that you would have said that anybody on here would have been your favourite person, and I was like, well, you've instantly just you've instantly just done us dirty there. But
Well,
I feel loads better about it now.
well, do you know what? I've got to be honest with two different explanations for both here, really. So, Mike, we do stuff quite often, don't we, on here? And your extensive knowledge in the tactical side of things, obviously quite intimidating to speak to you about, even though I've been broadcasting for like probably more than half my life doing these things. And Adam, previously of your career as a journalist as well, mate. And it's been a long, long time since we've done one of these things, isn't it? So for that reason, I was extremely looking forward to this evening, but also I was quite intimidated thinking about the standards that I'll be talking to be honest with you. And also I want to start with what happened against Brentford last week. Now I don't want to bang on about it, that it was just what was it, our sixth victory in the Premier League so far this season. Obviously, there's a lot of interest now, I think, from even neutral football fans looking at the state of the second half of the Premier League, and up to 9 teams you can potentially get relegated because there's 5 points between up to 12th, isn't there? But there's one of the subjects that's come to mind so far this week, and it was a piece in the Echo about Doucoure. And I've been really interested in the reaction from many people, really, because it tends to veer from quite in the middle of whether people want him to stay and happy for him to stay and sign a 1-year extension. Others are completely happy to get rid of him. And I know that'll be based on whether they think we're going to be in the Premier League or not. I think it's completely different, obviously, if we were to go down. But I'll come to you first, Adam. Abdoulaye Doucoure, he was really good, I thought, against Brentford. He started to show some signs that certainly went missing, to be quite polite about what he did previous to Sean Dyche coming. But Dyche certainly seems to be getting the best out of him, or starting to get the best out of him. When we initially signed him, it felt a little bit more at home than what we've seen from him, certainly under Frank Lampard anyway.
Yeah. Well, I can't deny the good run of form that he's been in since Sean Dyche came in. And I think probably the Brentford game was one of the better examples of that. I think he was really, really good. I think he's been pretty good in all of Dyche's games, to be honest. He's playing as part of that midfield three that we all thought was going to be so good at the start of the season. But the problem that I've got with Doucoure is that he is this kind of player who can have these spells of form. Like, let's not forget, at the start of Rafa Benitez's time in charge, Doucoure looked like an almost different player. He scored that fantastic goal against Southampton in Benitez's first home game. And, I remember I myself and everybody who was working for the Echo at the time were thinking, right, well, this has got to be, the sort of beginning of Doucoure's actual time at Everton. But he still found a way to trail off. And, I think a lot of players will all, collectively be able to bring better form with a new manager bounce. But I just don't want Everton to commit to somebody like Doucoure just on the back of a new manager bounce. Like, if this is the profile of player that Sean Dyche thinks that he wants and that he can't get in any other capacity, then I'd be happy for, I suppose I would. I'd be happy for a year extension. But if there's a way that Everton can find somebody different to do the same job, then I'd be more tempted to go for that option, because, he's Doucoure, the wrong side of 30 now, has been inconsistent at best over the course of his time at Everton. And, even though he's played well over the last few weeks, I don't want us to just be convinced by one little spell of form to, because it's going to be, quite a significant chunk of wages, I can only imagine, that would be going on to a new contract for Doucoure as well. So Everton have just got to remember the sort of financial position they're in that sense. Things are still going to have to be quite tight, I think, over the course of the next couple of transfer windows. And, if Doucouré is somebody who falls by the wayside in that, I think Everton should be able to replace his influence in the side.
Yeah, Mike, it's interesting what Adam says there about the sort of that trait that he's been speaking about there with Doucouré is something that has been well trodden, hasn't it, in years gone by, where we've looked at players, trusted them, and then it's ultimately gone the other way. Like the plus point, of course, is what we've seen him get, and you'll have been looking at this quite deeply, of what he's been like since Sean Dyche came in. And against Brentford, in my opinion, I thought that midfield three that we had in there, certainly Idrissa Gueye as well, probably one of the best games I've seen him had for a long time as well. Do you put your faith in Doucouré, or do you simply look at this and think the catch-22 for me would be that if you're not going to stick with him and you say, okay, let's cut ties, and he's not going to stay with us, then therefore that puts the pressure on us going out and signing somebody. And to be as polite as I could possibly be, our record of signing players has been quite horrendous in recent years that we all know about under Farhad Moshiri. So you sort of, it feels like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of moving parts on Doucouré, I suppose. I've never really been a major fan of Doucouré. I didn't want us to sign him. I thought he was quite a bit overrated at Watford, but I've been really impressed with him in Dyche's opening 7 games, and I think he's probably, maybe other than McNeil, probably the best performing player in comparison to what went before in the first half of the season. He's definitely probably been the player who's benefited the most from the managerial change. Obviously, I think it's well documented that I don't think he liked Lampard particularly. So I think me and him would probably get on quite well.
Incidentally, before you carry on there, Adam, you must have heard by now that probably the first fan out of the entirety of any Everton fan that wanted rid of Frank Lampard before anybody. It's fair to say that, Mike, isn't it?
I'm not sure I'll go that far. The first fan of everyone, of anyone.
I heard you wanted him gone 2 years before he joined.
I heard you were stood outside Goodison waiting for his car to turn up so you could stand outside and shout that you wanted them gone before he signed his contract.
You covered up the Pereira out thing with Lampard out, didn't you?
Yeah, if you actually look closely of the Pereira out, Lampard in, there's a little smaller one underneath saying Lampard out as well. That was me. But yeah, back to Doucouré. I think for probably the first time in a long while on a contract situation, Everton actually have the upper hand, I suppose, in that. I think I'm right in saying he has a 12-month option that the club can trigger, if and when they please. I think obviously a lot of it depends on, what league we're in. I think also a lot of it depends on the state of the rest of the midfield as well. It doesn't look like Tom Davies is going to go, which I think is probably the best for his career. I think there's probably a possibility, I'd probably say leaning to the more than likely stage that someone comes in for, or at least tries to buy Onana in the summer. And then all of a sudden, if Doucouré goes as well, you've lost 3 of your 4 main midfielders at the moment, and it's one of them whether you want to go into another summer when I suppose there's so many other priorities. Do you want to have to buy a whole new midfield all over again when you can, whilst I'm sure Doucouré's on quite a bit of money, you can just trigger him and maybe delay that issue for a further 12 months. But I suppose it really comes down to what happens in the next 11 games. He's got to keep the performance level that he's been at for the last 7 and take that into the next 11, because I think he's been really good, and I think if he keeps performing at that level, then I think he definitely boosts Everton's survival chances, because I think without Calvert-Lewin in the side at the moment, I think he's played the really important part in being that energy and that presence in the box, especially now that Demarai Gray's playing up front is obviously quite different to any other option. So obviously I think play it by ear is probably the answer I'd go for. But if I had to pick, I'd probably trigger the extension and see where we're at next season.
I mean, Adam, do you get to the extent where, say, he's one of the key reasons we stay up, you know, and given the result of the weekend against Brentford. I mean, Brentford have become my second favourite team. Sometimes my more favourite team than Everton. in that they went out to Southampton and won, didn't they? And this weekend they've got one of the sides, haven't they, in the bottom half as well.
Leicester,
Leicester, they do us a favour when they go there as well. You know, that performance against Brentford was something that I looked at and thought, well, that's probably the best I've seen in some time. And I know the win against Arsenal, of course, is what's going to be the top of everybody's list of how Everton have played under Sean Dyche and the best we've played. But in regards to how we won the game, in how, I say, comfortable in inverted commas we were defensively too. But the thing that that I keep being drawn to is that midfield three that we've looked at. Onana, I think it's been spoken about a hell of a lot since we got him, and the level at which he has and can be and the potential he's got, that remains to be seen. I think sometimes it's quite easy to go off on a bit of a tangent about that lad, given that you've seen the attributes he's got, but I still think, to be nice about it, there's more to come, because I've seen times where he's made mistakes. I've seen times when he hasn't looked as effective as you would have expected to be, or as people would have expected to be had they not watched them as much this season. But when I mentioned the name there of Idrissa Gueye, that was the first time in a long time that I looked at him and thought, this looks like the one that we got when we first signed him, not one that's come back from PSG and stood in a side that's had 70-80% possession, where he hasn't really had to do anything defensively. And I probably gave him the allowance of it'll take him a while to get back to what he needs to do when he's swapping a side that is taking the piss out of the League One and then come back to the Premier League, but he's got to go in a side where most of the time we travel away, we've got 30-odd% possession and he's chasing the ball. But that I was a lot more confident with him in that midfield against Brentford.
Yeah, definitely. I think I was coming out of the ground against Brentford saying that he was probably up there with Everton's best players on the day, and I think that's realistically the first time that I've really said that since he made his return. I think on Onana, like, weirdly, I think he's maybe dropped off over the last couple of games in terms of, you know, the kind of ceiling that we've seen him reach over the course of the season. But, you know, obviously it's his first season in the Premier League. He didn't really have much senior football even elsewhere before he came here. So, you know, he's still a young player who's going to fluctuate. And, you know, if this is the low ebb of his form, then he's going to be some player in the future. But yeah, back to Idrissa Gueye. I think the kind of midfield setup that Everton have got at the minute just seems to play into his hands a little bit more, doesn't it? Like we were seeing, especially in the second half, we were seeing Idrissa Gueye push up to be almost alongside Demarai Gray when Everton were out of possession in terms of, you know, pressing up against the Brentford defenders. And I think he's a little bit more comfortable in that sort of role where he can have a little bit of freedom to, you know, chase the ball a little bit, you know, hunt people down to make those tackles. You know, he's obviously very good at reading the ball and intercepting it as well, isn't he? And I just think the kind of makeup that we've got in that midfield with that trio of personnel, it just gives him that little bit more freedom to be able to do that. Whereas, you know, we did see a bit of a period of relative success with Iwobi, Onana, and Idrissa Gueye in a midfield trio. But I think Iwobi being there rather than Doucoure, it does just restrict Garner a little bit more in terms of he's got to sit back more. He's got to be the one to pick up the ball off the defenders. But it doesn't really seem to be the case in this sort of midfield trio. It seems like he's got a bit more of an allowance to push up, and it looks as if Sean Dyche is even encouraging him to push up, which, you know, it's only going to play into his strengths more, isn't it? And, you know, at the end of the day, that's almost the basics of football management. Just play to the strengths that your players have got and try and avoid their weaknesses as much as possible. And, you know, even against Brentford, I do think Idrissa Gueye made some mistakes in possession. I think he held onto the ball a bit too long on a couple of occasions, misplaced a few passes on a couple of occasions as well. But, you know, I think in general that's got to be the sort of baseline from him now to to go and build on in the future. And hopefully, if we can, touch wood, keep all these 3 players fit in particular, and just be able to build around that midfield setup, I think it's only going to be beneficial for the remaining matches of this season.
Well, there's 2 factors of that. What Adam's mentioned there, Mike, and one of them's James Garner getting back into the side, because we still haven't seen much of him at all since he came in. And then Adam mentioned the Iwobi there. Now it just seems the Everton way that everybody can all shine on the same day at the same time, and I think that's a lot to do with the reason we've had to be so poor for the last couple of years, effectively since Carlo Ancelotti left. But with the Iwobi, have you seen a lot of difference under Dyche where he can't quite hit the levels of what we've seen him do last season, when we were all looking at each other saying, where was this lad when we first bought him for 30-odd million quid from Arsenal? Because when I see him, he has a lot of different things he can do. And sometimes I think that works to his detriment somehow, because I like to see him sort of drifting in from the left-hand side. I like to see him sometimes as a 10 as well, particularly when we haven't got a decent striker or a prolific striker, him to get involved in that and try and help out who's up there. What have you made of him and how Dyche has played, the way he's done so far?
I don't know about yourselves and your opinion on Iwobi's performances, but I think he's actually probably relatively been quite consistent and done okay in terms of what's actually been asked of him. I don't think that the role is particularly suited for him, and I think I think you hinted at it there, and he's probably better off cutting inside, coming off the left rather than, I think we saw that at the start of the season when he played in midfield. He was the midfield, especially in the first couple of games until he was moved again by Lampard. He was like the left midfielder in the midfield 3. And he was playing in that left half space, and that's probably where he operates, where he's the most productive. But still, despite that, in terms of his actual numbers, he's still creating a decent amount of chances. He was heavily involved in the goal on Saturday. He was, he played a really important role in terms of playing the ball out to Doucoure quite quickly. And I think, if you actually watch the goal properly in terms of where he started when Demarai Gray, when the ball's aimed towards Demarai Gray, he's pretty much, man marking Seamus Coleman, and yet he still manages to get all the way up to support Gray and feed the ball into Doucoure. So I think he's still quite an important cog in this Everton team at the moment. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the summer, and that, he's another one who's got, in terms of, talking of contracts, is, come the summer he'll have 12 months on his deal, unless he signs a new contract. Again, it's another one who I think it obviously depends what league we're in. But I don't think he's the stereotypical, wide player for Sean Dyche, in that, he's not a major crosser, and I think he does rather want to come inside and play in the middle, which is not something you often see from Dyche's wingers. When you compare someone who like Dwight McNeil, for instance, who's obviously seems to be, not the polar opposite, but a little bit more of a traditional winger, whereas Iwobi isn't that. So it'd be interesting to see in the summer whether they try and bring someone who suits Dyche's system more. But I've been pleasantly happy that he's remained in the team, and on his performance levels have remained quite consistent, because I think there's probably a little bit of a worry that, if when Dyche came in, if people were told, Iwobi's going to be moved out wide again, and I'm sure a lot of people have been like, oh well, we've seen that before, and it's not been brilliant to watch, but he's been decent.
And sort of by the same token of it, as you mentioned there, McNeil as well, the sort of the variance that seems to be coming with Iwobi and the way Dyche seems to use him and move him about a bit, whereas in comparison to McNeil, who's obviously not going to change from being a player in the left wing who whips the ball in, but I actually thought again started to see him progress, certainly against Forest away. I like the passion that he showed as well by, giving the fist towards our fans at Forest as well the other week, and then obviously scored a really good goal. Which, by the way, I mentioned this on our podcast earlier this week, but it looked exactly the same, as well as Gareth Barry, I think, scored one against Norwich a few years ago. It looked identical to that goal. But yeah, on Iwobi and him, certainly the winger side of the game. What have you seen you think of Iwobi? Because like Mike says there, I mean, a lot of them, well, that's a lot of them, almost all of them are playing for the futures in many ways, given that if we go down, you could imagine it'd be like a bit of a fire sale at Goodison. But now, what are these two looking like for you when you've watched them both, particularly Iwobi?
I quite like the pair of them, to be honest. Like, just quickly on McNeil, I think you're definitely seeing him grow into himself a little bit more. You can definitely see the confidence flowing through him a little bit more, because I think one of the things that I've noticed since he came to Everton, up until Frank Lampard was sacked and Sean Dyche came in, was that he was just hardly ever shooting. He's got such a good left foot on him for a shot from distance, but he just never seemed confident enough to use it. But now you're seeing him take shots a little bit more regularly. He had that one against Forest that Navas did well to tip over the bar, and then obviously he scored within a minute of this game as well. And I just think it's really nice to see that confidence flowing through him a little bit more. All right, obviously he's still a very limited player in a lot of senses, but I think he is quite clearly giving his everything at the minute. And it's starting to pay off in terms of his quality of deliveries into the box and his shots on goal. So Everton fans are always going to warm to that. And I think on Iwobi's side of things, it's just tricky for him, isn't it? Because he's just not an out and out winger. Like, it's hard to nail down what position he is, because obviously at the start of the season we were all thinking that he was this amazing central midfielder. And I think if we maybe had a different setup or different personnel in a midfield trio, then Iwobi would be absolutely phenomenal still in that role. And I do think having him central is still his best position. But, Sean Dyche is asking him to do a job out on the wing, and I don't think he's doing that job badly at all. I think, his pass in the build-up to the goal at the weekend is probably, a little bit underrated, isn't it? And I'm just really happy with, I think the thing that I'm most happy with is just that his work rate is so consistent for me. He doesn't really seem to let his head drop in terms of, if he takes on a man and loses the ball, he doesn't let that affect him the next time he gets the ball against the same defender. He will still take them on if he thinks it's the best option, or he can, he's still one of the best players the best player that Everton have got in terms of eyeing up, especially like a through ball to somebody like Demarai Gray, you'd be running onto it, or fingers crossed in the future Dominic Calvert-Lewin might be running onto at least one before the end of the season, but maybe no guarantees on that front.
But do you know Adam, sorry to interrupt you, I was just thinking that when you said that about Iwobi and having Gray up there in front of him, which, well, hook or by crook, it's happened that he's our centre forward for the time being, because Neil Maupay's Neil Maupay, and also Calvert-Lewin was still waiting to see him come back, which has been a crazy and got a bit out of hand the way people talk about him and discuss his situation in terms of his fitness and whatnot. But I think, like, I'm not putting words in your mouth here, but what you mentioned there about Iwobi putting that ball through to him, I actually think they complement each other a lot. With Gray in front of him. I can see a lot of progress coming from that being the situation, really, and it feels like it has been done by accident, given that the other two, Maupay and Calvert-Lewin, haven't been our out and out strikers all season long.
Well, 100%. I mean, you look back to Maupay scoring against West Ham and the kind of link up play that he had. It was Iwobi who set that up, wasn't it?
Yeah.
On that day. So I remember watching that, and I was thinking to myself, it might be really good to see this sort of link up between these two. And then it's just, obviously Maupay's form just has never really picked up from there, and it's just never materialized. But, I think probably the Forest game in particular, we're seeing a lot of that really nice link up between Gray and Iwobi. And I think you're absolutely right. I think the style of play in that sense could definitely complement each other. And I think it's easy to forget as well that Demarai Gray's playing out of position as well, isn't he? Like, he's not a central striker. He's not somebody who's comfortable or used to leading the line in the sense that he is. And having somebody like Iwobi playing up top with him, who's so versatile in himself, they can switch positions if they need to. They can, when Gray runs out like off the shoulder of the last defender. He knows that Iwobi's going to have the eye for a pass and, you know, the capability to be able to play him into that space as well. So, you know, fingers crossed it's something that Everton don't sort of lose over the next trio of games, because obviously, let's be honest, we're probably not going to have a lot of possession over the next 3 games if, you know, Gray is going to be the man playing up front over the course of the next 3 games. It's going to be all about probably fast counter attacks, being able to play the right passes at the right times, and, you know, if that is to be the case over the next 3 games, the main avenue I can see for Everton scoring is Iwobi playing in Demarai Gray. Like, I think that's, I'd be hard pressed to find many other way apart from a set piece. Obviously, I'd be hard pressed to find another way that Everton might score from open play, unless somebody's going to absolutely pull out a 35-yard screamer, which I'm not against. Like, if Seamus Coleman wants to ping one in from the byline again, then, you know, be my guest. But yeah, like, I'm quite happy with Iwobi personally. I'm really happy with McNeil. It's just, you know, it's a little bit square pegs in round holes with Iwobi right now, but he's so versatile that, you know, he can do a job there for now for me.
Well, Mike, that sort of segues us perfectly into where I wanted to get in the sort of little bit of a circle we've spoken around here in terms of our attacking prowess. Now, Calvert-Lewin, still wondering when he comes back, and happy birthday, Dom, as well, because wasn't it yesterday? He's getting some sort of ridiculous levels of abuse on social media, which has been quite staggering for me this year. Actually, some of the lads being out injured. I'm pretty sure he's not wanting to be out injured, but nonetheless, a lot of people certainly think in strange ways, don't they? But what I'm thinking about this is what Adam's just said there about Gray and complementing nicely with Iwobi. You've got the 2 flanks sorted in different ways. With Calvert-Lewin coming back, which we expect to probably be in one of the next 3 games, possibly even against Chelsea, he'll start back on the bench. I don't think there's any question about that, and thrown straight back in. Given how things look like they've got something cooking quite nicely, or brewing underneath, whichever way you want to put it, what happens when he's fully fit? Because when I look at this situation right now, would you rather stick with what you're seeing and improve him with Gray as our centre forward, or would you rather say that you've got to Calvert-Lewin back in? If that's the case, what do you do with Gray? Because you're not going to want to put him on one of the wings when they're 2 are actually progressing quite well. It becomes a bit of a dilemma, doesn't it?
I think it's pretty straightforward, to be honest. Sorry, Dave.
You don't have to apologise, mate. It's exactly your opinion that I want. Yeah.
I think if Calvert-Lewin's fully fit, you know, Dyche said today he didn't seem too confident that he'd be involved on Saturday, which I don't think I really expected anyway. And I think maybe Gray's threat on the counter could be quite beneficial anyway. But for me, I think, you know, if it's toss up between, you know, Demarai Gray and Calvert-Lewin, and Calvert-Lewin starts, and I don't think it's a case of, you know, when obviously Calvert-Lewin's back, do we try and fit Gray in the team over McNeil or Iwobi, or do we change the midfield? I think Gray just goes back, in my opinion, to where he was a couple of weeks ago, before he was given a chance up front against Forest. And obviously it'll be nice to have, I suppose, more threat coming off the bench if and when we need it. I think we've seen quite clearly in the last 2 games, you know, when we're winning, Dyche is not the biggest fan of substitutes. I think it's definitely different when we're trying to chase the game. When we get to see that, we've not really seen that at the moment. Well, I think probably Anfield, he obviously wasn't. It's probably the only real opportunity where we've seen substitutes come on. But I think when we're protecting a lead, he's quite happy to be conservative with the subs. But with that, I think it will just be a case of Gray will go back to being a substitute option, and I think that's just sensible. But to be fair, I've been on Gray. I've been quite surprised at how well he's done in the last 2 games. I didn't think it would work, if I'm honest, and I think I probably wasn't the only one in that. You know, if you asked most people when Dyche came in, I think everyone would expect him to make us quite solid and defensively resolute. But I think it's actually been the opposite. I think Everton are obviously a lot more solid. We're conceding less shots and everything. But our creativity has really improved and really progressed since Dyche came in. I thought we were really good in the first half against Brentford. Obviously against Forest, I thought we were really, really confident going forward. I think that type of game is something maybe in the past where I think I'd expect us to kind of go into a shell a little bit, away from home against a team really good at home. Obviously, we've got a dreadful away record, and it was frustrating that we didn't win the game. But I thought we were really convincing. I think is probably the best way to describe Everton's attacking performances since Dyche came in. And I think we're now at a stage where, before when Calvert-Lewin was out the side under Lampard, I was never too keen on let's just get Calvert-Lewin back in the team and everything will be rosy, because I don't think our creativity numbers were good enough to think we just need a goal scorer back in the team, especially Calvert-Lewin, who's not exactly someone who's going to be able to create something out on his own. It's just the type of striker he is. But we're now at a point where I think the attack is performing at a level where if you do put that type of goal scorer in the team, it will go up another level. And I think it's at a good place at the moment, and obviously it'll be tested even more the next 3 games. Obviously 3 difficult games, and hopefully Dom will be back for at least 2 of them.
Do you agree with that, Adam? I mean, the other thing as well, playing devil's advocate a little bit in terms of Calvert-Lewin being back, there'll be a lot of a shout of saying, well, do you therefore now look at Gray playing alongside him or just behind him? Whereas Mike saying there, you'd probably throw Gray back on the bench if Calvert-Lewin's fit. What's your stance towards that?
I completely agree, to be honest, because I think there's been just too many times over the last few weeks where you're looking towards the bench for an attacking option and you've just got a real dearth of attacking quality on the bench, especially attacking quality that's in any sort of form at the minute. So as frustrating as that probably will be for Gray, when Calvert-Lewin's back, I think he does just walk back into this team, because the last time he played was that game against Arsenal, played for about an hour, was it? And I think he was absolutely fantastic in that game, to be fair. And it kind of just summed up how different Everton can set up and look with him up at the top end of the pitch. And I think Mike's absolutely right in what he's saying. Everton are looking a lot more confident and a lot more fluid going forward, especially over the last couple of games. Well, the first half against Brentford in particular. But yeah, to have Calvert-Lewin in the box to be able to be on the end of some of these crosses, I think that just amplifies it even more. And then, if it's not working, then you've got somebody with the quality of Demarai Gray to hit a tired defence in the second half, whether you put him up front or you maybe put him on the wing and take Iwobi off or move him into a different position, etc. I just think that absolutely it just makes Everton that little bit stronger. It might seem a little bit harsh on Gray, because I'm not saying that he's performed badly at all. I think he's been fantastic over the last couple of games, but it's just the way it is for Everton at the minute. I don't think they can afford to be sentimental and leaving out our best striker, but just because Demarai Gray's in a bit of a decent run of form when he's out of position, I think you've just got to be ruthless. And I think Calvert-Lewin would be a better option if both players are fit up front. So that's it for me. I think Gray just drops to the bench, but hopefully we'll be able to actually talk about this as a reality in the future, because I wasn't expecting Calvert-Lewin to be involved against Chelsea anyway, but there was just some part of what Dyche was saying today which made me think, he might not even be fit after the international break. So I'll have to just believe it when I see it for Calvert-Lewin to be back. And I do feel so sorry for him, because it must be so frustrating for him to be sat on the sidelines, not being able to do anything to help. But yeah, as I say, fingers crossed we see him back in the side soon.
Just looking towards these 3 big games you've got coming up here, Mike. I mean, I think many people are looking at each other saying, well, it's all well and good looking like we're doing okay and things are progressing under Sean Dyche. The league table starting to look tentatively a little bit better than what it was, i.e. we're out to the bottom three, but there's still sides around us that have got games in hand. There's plenty of them in there. I think that's better for us, that there's more teams in it than there was a little bit earlier this season. But these next three coming up, I don't know, personally, I'm always been known as a miserable fan anyway, to say the very least. But looking at Chelsea, United, Spurs, the home game is one that I'm obviously looking forward to the most against Spurs, with us in mind of getting results here. But do you look at certainly Chelsea on Saturday evening? Do you look at that with any more confidence, or do you simply think, yeah, it's one that you simply have to look at and take as it's going to be a big ask to get anything, particularly at a time when they've started looking a lot better under Graham Potter, got through to the last eight of the Champions League and started winning some games for a manager that was very, very much under pressure?
Yeah, I mean, it's typical that we're playing them after they've just won 3 in a row and not like 6 weeks ago, innit? I'm realistic about all three. You know, I think, you know, I'm 20. I'm trying to think how old I am. What year is it? 2023. Yeah, so I'm 22. And Everton have never won.
There's no way you're only 22. And by the way, I know you've got like a young looking face, mate, but I never had it down for 22. I was thinking at least 25. Yeah. Mate. I think you're lying.
Not 23 for another 5 months. And Everton haven't won at Stamford Bridge in my lifetime. I think the only time is the FA Cup game, and even then it was on penalties. So I think it's fair to say I'm pretty realistic at our hopes on Saturday, as per any other away game against the top 6 sides. I think we're all conditioned at this point, aren't we? But it's a weird one, because part of me says that, you know, Chelsea were in a rut for so long. How likely is it that they were in that rut for them to then go and win 4 games in a row, which would be the case if they won on Saturday? Dyche has an all right record at Stamford Bridge and at Old Trafford. I think he obviously won there on the opening day a couple of years ago. He won at Old Trafford as well. I'm definitely more confident for the Tottenham game, obviously with it being at home compared to the other two. But I think you have to approach it. Well, I think I say we as fans. I hope that the players and the staff aren't. But I think anything other than a defeat, you just have to take as a bonus. Hopefully, we can just go there and be competitive. You know, if we perform like we did in the opening 40 minutes at the Emirates before we conceded, like we did then, and take that into Saturday's game, then I think we've got a good chance. You know, I'm a big fan of Graham Potter, and I watched a lot of his Brighton team and subsequently a lot of his Chelsea team. And while I'm a big fan, I think they play some good football and quite effective football, I do think they are vulnerable, and I think we've seen that obviously in the last couple of months. I don't think that's a big shocking statement. And so, whilst, you know, going to Stamford Bridge has in the past been a bit of a scary proposition, and it still will be difficult on Saturday, I think it's probably a little bit easier than it has been in the past.
Yeah, Adam, it just got me thinking then, what Mike was talking about then in regards to how poor of a record we've got, not just in Chelsea, but also the sides that have generally been in the top half of the Premier League table in our years as fans. But the one that did strike my mind then was when we went 3-1 up there, and then they allowed John Terry to score about 10 minutes after they said how long was left. I remember being so furious about that game. I think Funes Mori actually scored in that one as well, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, that was a bizarre game. Was that the second time that season that we'd drawn 3-3 with a goal in like the 98th minute or something like that? Because we did the same against Bournemouth.
Oh yeah, do you remember that? It was when did it look like we won a 3-2 back? And then they go up the other end and score the equaliser. It's the kiss of death when it comes to whether they celebrate what we think's already won. But yeah, just on what Mike said then, I thought he was spot on what he said about Graham Potter. In fact, when that happened and he decided to leave Brighton and go to Chelsea, I think it's difficult for a young manager to refuse that. But at the same time, and I looked at it and I thought, do you know what? He's leaving somewhere that looks very, very special right now in Brighton. And Roberto De Zerbi's already made it look like that himself as well. They've actually got a really decent chance of getting in the top 4, the way in which they're playing right now. And another side that did us a decent duty of putting Palace away last night as well. Do you look at this? I mean, I felt sorry for him as well, and it's been really interesting and surprising that he still got the job there, given how quickly Chelsea have acted in the past. But then again, they do have a new owner, don't they?
Yeah.
Looking at this one, personally think it's hard to see us getting the results at Stamford Bridge.
It is interesting, isn't it? Like I think I've felt sorry for Graham Potter as well over the past couple of months when Chelsea's form was deteriorating as it was, and they just couldn't seem to buy a goal at some stages throughout that. But he is a really, really good manager, and Chelsea are just in such a state of flux at the minute in terms of their boardroom, their ownership, their coaching staff, the players on the pitch. Like I'm glad to see that it seems that calmer heads have prevailed at this point, and they're going to give Graham Potter a bit of a chance to stabilize things and build. But I do hope that Everton can do him a little bit of a disservice in that sense, and maybe put a little bit more of the pressure back on, because I think Mike was right in what he was saying. The first 40 minutes against Arsenal should really be the sort of blueprint that Everton that Everton aim for, because it's just all about competing, isn't it? Like, you've got to go to these sides and you've got to make it difficult for them. Everton aren't going to be able to stand toe-to-toe with Chelsea in terms of quality. They're not going to be able to stand toe-to-toe with Spurs in terms of quality, or Manchester United. That's a given. But there's still 11 players on that pitch against their 11 players. They can go and have just as much, if not more, fight than all of those players. You've got to be able to compete in every single battle, and that's unfortunately what Everton let drop off in the second half against Arsenal. I do think they let their heads go a little bit, and a 4-0 defeat was a real gut punch in the end. They can't really let that happen again, and I think Sean Dyche will probably have been hammering that into his players over the course of the last few days on the training ground. He that's just not the way he wants his side to set up. And Chelsea over the last few weeks, as Mike said, have shown that they do have vulnerabilities. It's annoying that over the last couple of games they've found a way to put the ball in the back of the net, but Everton have shown that they can be strong defensively. So it's a real toss up. As a fan, you don't ever want to go into a game thinking it'd be amazing if we didn't lose this one. But with the way
it's hard
the season,
not to think that, isn't it?
Well, that's it. With the way the season's gone, and with our record at Stamford Bridge, it's hard not to think that anything but a loss will be a bonus. But I do also think that it's maybe a bit more likely than other people think. It's maybe a little bit more achievable than people think. If Everton can at least start the game well, maybe get the Chelsea crowd a little bit more edgy. Anything can happen. So, fingers crossed Sean Dyche just allows that squad to learn the mistakes that they made in that Arsenal game. And as long as we see a 90-minute performance that we can say at the end of the day, right, well, we put up a fight there. If Chelsea have got better players and they've had better quality, then they've had better quality. But I just want to see a real battle for it. Like it seems it seems proper blasé to say, doesn't it? And it seems it just doesn't seem very analytical, but it's just what I want to see. And I think it'll stand them in good stead going into the Spurs game if they do show that little bit more bottle and that little bit more battle. So I don't know where to stand. I'm not gonna lie to you, Dave. I don't really know where
that's the thing that I was kind of quite amusing. Then you just sort of arguing with yourself. Then
I am. I fully am. That's what I've been like before every game over the last 2 months. At this point, I just don't know. I don't know what to think.
Yeah, you don't know which Everton. Well, it's nice to actually say. I think compared to a few months ago, it's actually nice to say that you don't know what Everton you're going to get, because we all knew what Everton we were going to get for so long as well, didn't we? It's quite ironic at the moment. The point you were making there, the period about Chelsea, I think it's really interesting that whilst having the sympathy against Graham Potter and what's happened there, I don't think if you don't have to look too below the surface to see that at Chelsea and what the issue has been. But people from other clubs, other football fans would look at that and think, how can you possibly not want to sack somebody who signed that many players in a window and not being able to get a tick out of them? Well, I think the proof's in the pudding in terms of, well, if you go and sign, what was it, a double-figure amount of players, who world-class players, by the way. We're not just talking about lads who'll get in the squad and lads who'll just be sitting on your bench and maybe they get a game or two. We're talking about top-class players who they've brought in. Getting a mix out of them is obviously going to take some time. So I think it might be a strange thing to say about Chelsea, but fair play to their owner for sticking with them right now. Completely different setup than what they had with Abramovich in there. So it remains to be seen what happens there. But let's hope it's us to put them back under a bit of pressure by taking at least a point when we go down there. Before we finish then, lads, Michael, come to you first. What do you think's going to happen at Stamford Bridge and what score are you predicting?
I think I'll go for a nice boring 0-0. Take a point, run, get another point on the board, and go from there. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but hopefully.
Well, two teams who've struggled to score goals recently, isn't it? Apart from Chelsea in the last few games and getting through to the quarter-final of the Champions League. But the less said about that, the better. Adam, what prediction are you going for?
I've argued myself into a 2-1 win for Everton. Why not?
I'm not going to let you say any more, mate, because you probably say we're going to get beat if we leave you for 30 seconds longer.
Yeah, probably.
I actually think more optimistic for once. I think we'll go there and get a point. I think it'll be a score draw. And Dyche does what Dyche has been known to do. It's a stereotype Dyche, even though that's what I feel like I've been doing since we've had him there, in terms of the type of play that he puts into sides. I think about Sean Dyche, anytime I think about him or discuss him with friends and on podcasts like this, I start thinking of him almost immediately is the way in which he ran Burnley, which used to do my head, and I used to hate going to Burnley away. But there was a reason why Burnley were like that, and the team and the squad they had, and Dyche made that as good as he possibly could. I'm sure if you were to ask him a question away from anybody knowing what he was going to answer it with, he'd say, well, what would you expect me to do with a squad like Burnley? And I think we're starting to see that with Everton and the players that we've got, that it's slightly better. But it remains to be seen at 5:30 on Saturday night to see how we can get on. And let's navigate our way through these three difficult games and see we're still outside the bottom three. Lads, thanks so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure after so long with you, Adam, and long may it continue, mate, that we speak to each other a lot more. And
oh yeah, definitely.
Also, Mike, absolute pleasure as always, mate. That's why I seem to be asking you almost every single day, what time have you got to do a podcast? So yeah, thanks to you both. One thing I need to mention before we finish is that the WSL game, Merseyside Derby, takes place next Friday night at Goodison. There's still tickets available. Make sure you get involved with that. It's really cheap to go. I'd go if you're not thinking of going, if you're undecided whether to go, then get down there, because it'll be a fantastic game, fantastic atmosphere, and well worth watching. Some top class football. So do get down there if you can and say hello if you catch any of us down there. You've been listening to The Weekly on the Blue Room, and we'll speak to you again soon.